All right, so this is Photoshop Bootcamp 2, Compositing Images. In this particular project, we are going to sync the Statue of Liberty into Glacier National Park. So to do this, I've downloaded two files. Let me go ahead and click Open now. The first one that I'm going to want to open is the background, the lake in Glacier National Park. And you can see here we also have the Statue of Liberty. We'll get here in just a second. I'm going to click Open. And right off, we are greeted with this image here. Control-0 will let us zoom in to fit the screen. And over here, we have these layers. Now, in the layers, this says background and it's locked. This background layer, this means that this is the flattened image that cannot be edited. I'm going to actually click this right here. You'll see this changes from background to layer 0. And I'm going to call this Glacier Lake. Now, with these layers, what we're going to be doing is stacking things on top of each other, much like we would just stack things if we were cutting out pieces of paper and gluing them together. Now, in Photoshop, there is a shortcut that we can use now to put the Statue of Liberty in. The original way that we would want to do this would be we'd say, well, in a professional environment, we'd use this Adobe Bridge, or we'd go to Open and we would select it. We would drag its layer out of that image. The simple way to do this is I can also go to where I have the file, click on it here, drag, and drop. And we are greeted with the statue in an editable, a transformable, little handles here that let me do things like change size, move the statue around. And because we have this lake here, I'm going to put the statue about there, I would say. And once I have the statue, Statue of Liberty right where I want her, I am going to click Enter, press Enter, and go ahead and start trying to get all of this out of the way. Now, originally, it used to be that what we would have to do is start taking something like the lasso tool, and I could try to draw around this. And when I start to get to little spikes in the hat, I'm going to start messing up, and at some point, this could take me forever to trace around the statue. Luckily, Adobe has built in some more automated tools for selections. Under this, if I click and hold, I get the Object Selection tool, the Quick Selection tool, and the Magic Wand tool. I'll start and show you the Magic Wand tool lets us do things like select, say, well, there's not that much, all the blue of this particular color of blue in the sky, which might be helpful in some cases, but in this case doesn't really help us. We also have the Quick Selection tool. This would let me drag along, and this might take a little bit of time. I might accidentally go over here, and I might end up with half the image selected. We go to Select, Deselect. The last tool that's in here, and this is the newest tool for them, is the Object Selection tool. And up here we have the Object Finder. Sometimes this will spin a little bit as it looks at the image and tries to find the objects. And we'll see that if we go in here now, it is accurate enough that I can actually select the statue. And it knows that she's holding this and that. And let's go ahead and select that. And here we have the entire statue just automatically selected exactly how we want it. Now, one of the things that we can do with these marching ants, aside from what we learned with the healing brushes and the clone stamps, is something called masking. Down here at the bottom right corner, there is a little there's our effects, there's some of our layering things, but this little square with a dot in it, if we click this will actually mask, just like that, everything around the statue that was selected. And at this point, I'm actually going to grab the move tool. I'm going to move the statue down a little bit. And we'll see that the mask actually moves with her. Now, I will show you this. There's these little chains between this. And if I move this, you'll see that the mask can actually be moved without the statue. I'm going to Command Z to undo there. And the statue can actually be moved without the mask. Undo again. If I click between these again, I can get those chains, the little chain in there. And that locks them together in a way that will let us keep them together. Now, this is all well and good, but I really want to have Statue of Liberty maybe up to her waist in the water here. This is a deep lake. There's a couple of ways that we can actually edit this mask at this point. One would be to go to Select, go down to Select and Mask, and it will get you to the same place as if we are to very quickly double click on this little image, this tiny, I'm going to cancel out of that so we can see that again. This image of this tiny mask here, the black and white. If I double click on this, we'll see that this opens up. And now yours, when you open it up, will probably look like this. This is called onion skin. And what onion skin is it shows transparency of everything except the image that you have selected. I prefer to use overlay, and overlay helps because not only does it use the onion skin, but it also, the onion skin transparency, but it also puts this red on here in a way that I can see. Now the thing is, this is really helpful on anything except a red background. Luckily, we can actually change the color if we needed to, if we wanted it to be all blue, for instance. I do want it all red, so I'm going to cancel out. And over here on the left, we can see our toolbar has changed. We have that same object selection tool, the lasso tool, a hand tool, which will let us just move the image around, a zoom tool, which will let us zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. I can go up here and click fit screen again. We also have a regular quick selection tool, a refine edge brush tool. This is one that you would use particularly if you have a person with hair. Refine edge brush really feathers. You can see it kind of has these little feathers in it. It's helpful for that. And then the brush tool. And for today, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to click this brush tool. I'm going to push the size of this up, and we're going to see that. If I drag along here, whoop, this is actually painting in extra parts to the mask. If I click this now, we'll see that this adds that there. I'm going to double click back in here. Actually, I'm going to cancel so I don't do too many things. I'm going to go back up here to my history. I'm going to go back to move. And that's just going to let me get rid of this selected mask. I'm going to double click again. And we can see up here at the top, we have a plus sign in this. Well, I actually want to remove parts of my mask, so I'm going to click on the subtract from selection, the minus sign. I'm going to start over here, and I am going to erase, using the red, this here. And what this will do is, when I click OK, make it look like the statue is not really that convincingly in the water. Another thing about this that definitely you may have noticed is that the lighting is all wrong. This statue is brightly front lit. Of course, the sun, unfortunately, is behind her. So we might want to add some shadow to this front, to her front. To do this, one of the tricks that we can use as designers is to grab the marquee tool and choose, I'm going to choose, say, this part of the clouds back here. One reason that we might choose clouds like this is that by adding the cloud as the coloring for a shadow, we get not only the variation in tone that would look like more of a natural shadow, but we also get the same colors that are in the image. And I am going to edit and copy, and then edit and paste. And we'll see that right off, I have messed up. This has just pasted a weird black square in here. I'm going to Command Z to undo. And this is because I currently have the mask here selected. When I go to copy things, I have to be very mindful of the layers. To work with a layer, you have to have that layer selected. If that layer isn't selected, you cannot work with that layer. I'm going to click back on Glacier Lake, go back up to Edit, and Copy, and Edit, and Paste. And we'll see now that it says Layer 1, and this looks a little bit better. There's nothing there. I'm going to actually drag this layer on top here. By clicking and grabbing the gray side here, I can drag this up. I'm going to double click on where it says Layer 1. I'm going to call this Shading. There we go. I'm going to grab this Move tool because right now we don't see anything here, but if I click and drag, that layer is right there. The next thing that I might encounter is I want to try to cover the whole statue to get this shading right. So I'm going to need to transform this and actually stretch it a little bit to get it to fit. To do this, I can go up to Edit, and I can go down to Free Transform. What Free Transform, or Command T or Control T on Windows computer does, is it gives us the ability to move this around, but then also, just like when we had Liberty here in the first place, I can resize this. You'll notice it stays the same aspect ratio, same width to height ratio. If I didn't want that to be the case, while I am dragging, I can press and hold Shift, and it will let me do that as well. For today, I want it to be about there to go ahead and cover the statue. And I'm going to press Enter. And we have now covered the statue. Now, this next thing that I'm going to show you is a little bit more advanced. One of the things that we can do with masks, aside from adding them, subtracting them, we can actually duplicate them between different things. To do so, I would press and hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a Windows computer. Right before, so I'm doing nothing at this point. I press the Alt key. Now I'm going to click and hold on just that picture of the mask. Not the picture of the image, just the picture of the mask. And we'll see that I get this little black and white arrow thing. That is the duplicate arrow. So I'm still holding the Option or the Alt key and the mouse, and I'm going to drag this up so that that little blue square shows up around shading. I'm going to keep holding the key. I'm going to let go of the mouse. Now I'm going to let go of the key. And just like that, we now have the statue covered in this gray. And what I've done is I've actually duplicated this mask between the two layers. Now, this doesn't look very convincing at all. The next thing I might want to do is go ahead and change this to actual shading. Up here, this says normal. What this means is that it's going to treat it like just a normal image stacked on top of another image. But there are some special things that Photoshop can do, such as, in this case, I could click on something like you have dissolve, darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn. And these all have different ways that they can help. If I do something like hard light, for instance, we see this looks a lot more shadowy. If I wanted to lighten the statue up a little bit, I could even go as far as to move the opacity back and forth a little bit here. And just like that, the statue looks like she is in the water just a little bit more. Now, the last thing that we might want to do is make this actually more believable through the secret of the shadow. Don't know where I heard this, but I heard somewhere that dogs do not trust a person who doesn't cast a shadow. Neither should you, and you should never trust any photoshopped image or any image in particular like this that doesn't cast a shadow either. Now, the human eye does actually search for that shadow pretty much automatically. And so you can see that you look at this, you say, okay, yeah, this looks like the statue is sank in there, but this is a This is a pretty shoddy job here. So let's go ahead and add a shadow. Let's make this more convincing. To do that, down here in the bottom right corner, next to this trash can deletes layers. This little plus sign in the square lets us add layers. So I'm going to click Create New Layer here, and we'll see that this automatically creates layer 1. I'm going to call this Shadow. And to make my shadow, I'm actually going to draw the shadow rather than copying it from the world around it. To do this, I'm just going to grab the brush tool here, and I might change the size of this brush up a little bit. I might even back down the hardness to 0%. And what this does is this makes this a much lighter brush, makes the shadow not as hard. And I'm going to just draw a shadow for the statue in here. I put a little shading to the sides here. And that is absolutely not convincing. And I would say because the shadow needs to be behind the statue. And still not convincing. Because here it says normal. If I change this now to something like soft light, we can start to get that transparency that lets that shadow look more and more realistic. So at this point, I might even go back in here and start drawing some more shadow. I might decide that I need to get rid of some of the shadow. I can get the eraser tool, letter E. I can click this back if I wanted. I might go back to the brush tool and just might even change the color up here to something lighter. And just like that, I can start to get just that very subtle shadow that says to us that statue is probably in that lake. I'll get the eraser again. Clean that up. And there we go. Now, while you're doing this, you might also start to go back and say, well, that statue actually looks a little too light now. I might still darken the shadow up. I might even change the blending, might change it to multiply. Move the opacity back from there. I might even need to go in here to the shading mask. I might want to add to it a little bit so that we have some mixture of the shadow and the shading. Click OK. And just like that, just over and over, we can go through here and make this a more and more convincing image. Now, the other thing that I want to show you is that we've done this non-destructively. What this means is if I hide the shadow, hide the shading, and then go over here and control click or right click if you're on a Windows computer and say disable layer mask, you'll notice that this is the same Statue of Liberty image. Nothing has been erased, nothing has been changed. And this is particularly helpful if, for instance, we had to go in and replace the image, or we wanted to add more images or add this image somewhere else. I'm going to click enable layer mask again. Hide her again. And as a professional designer, if you're doing this, if you're compositing images like this, you may end up with anywhere from 20 to 60 to 100 layers like this that go even as far as maybe we want to add a very subtle shadow on the tablet in her left arm, for instance. So this is the very basics of this, and this is going to feed into the project for the class, where you will be able to now add anybody you want to an image, and then also with the first class, be able to take someone out of an image. So the last thing to remember to do is go up to File, Save As, and I am going to go to here. I'm going to change this. I'm going to call this Liberty. Call this Phil, my name, and then Liberty.psd. Make sure I'm saving it somewhere I know I can find it. And click Save. OK to maximize compatibility. And then I'm going to export this quickly as a PNG file. Again, into that same file, click Save again, and I will upload both of these.